I think while we're waiting for board member, Marsh, I think we'll go around and introduce everyone who's here so that we can get started on time, because we do have quite a hefty agenda. I'm Jennifer Gravitt, Chair of Standards and Assessment, and I represent Area 4, which is Weaver County, Davis County, and I'm a teacher at Sandridge Junior High School. Yes, well, we can
You're right there, man.
Oh my goodness, they've already set me up. I was waiting on it. You ever feel like you've been set up? Today's the day.
We do what we can here in Standards.
Linda Hanson, Vice Chair, District 3, Willa Juab, Salt Lake County.
Great.
I guess I'll go that way. Granite? Yeah, Salt Lake County. So I have Granite School District, well, I have all the way to the border.
Go to you? I thought it did, but I just.
From Redwood Road all the way to the border is what I've got. 41st north.
There you go. Thank you for that chapter. I love it.
Janet Cannon, and as Laura Gilmore says, I represent all the children.
Oh,
children, especially the children in Denver.
Next month you're going to sing Whitney Houston's.
Mark Marsh. I represent most of northeastern Utah. I go from Daggett all the way to Wasatch and over into most of Summit County and down Provo Canyon and around Orem city limits and a little sliver of Linden.
Okay. Let's just go around the table and then we'll get the audience.
Hey, Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator.
Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board.
Norley Green, and I am the Committee Secretary.
Extraordinaire.
Yes. Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Students.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and start.
Linda Hanks, local board member representing USDA. Julie District from Juab.
She's always there. We can always come and visit us.
Samuel Allen, Internal Audit. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices.
Corby Easton, Prevention Specialist here at USD.
Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning.
Dr. Bronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Erin Yanni, Implementation Coach.
Brett Larson, School and Student Safety Specialist.
Jessica Smith, Preschool Specialist. Jamie Robinson, Preschool through Second Grade Specialist.
Okay.
Cool. I didn't know you were an implementation coach.
I know.
That is a really
Is this a new
title.
position?
That's a cool title.
Yes.
I like it.
We like everything. We just do. On this committee, we just do. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Committee, we're going to try to make sure we ask our questions, make our motions, and move swiftly from item to item, and thoughtfully, of course. But, our first item is R277-400. It's the school facility emergency and safety.
Yeah.
I think we had to incorporate a definition here, or maybe that's the next one. But go ahead, we have Jeff Van Holten and Christy.
Yeah, go ahead. Hello, everyone. I'm just trying to find Rule 100, because 100 and 400, if it pleases the chair, we're going to discuss together.
Yeah, I was going to say they kind of go together where the definitions in there. That would be great.
And a draft 2 is being uploaded currently. I'm not sure if you're seeing it yet. We incorporated some
100?
of 100. Mm-hmm. We incorporated a couple of edits from USSA. But I can start with 400.
Okay, let's do that.
And where we're at. So if you recall, 400 is the school facility emergency and safety rule. So there's a lot of different elements of this rule that kind of talk about different pieces of emergency safety in the school facility. We had made the edits, passed out of this committee in August, went to the full board in September. It was referred back to this committee because we included social emotional learning in the edits, and there's no definition for social emotional learning. In a different committee in law and licensing right now, 609 will be heard a little bit later today, and 609, some of the new edits also include social emotional learning. So we thought, instead of defining it in 400 and then redefining it in 609, that we would put it to Rule 100. And for those who don't know, Rule 100, so we don't, if I'm like making this long journey very confusing,
Sorry, I was just saying that it's bad that I'm sitting in
to the
front of
candy, not you.
Oh, okay. I thought you were laughing being like, wow, what a saga. Okay.
Yeah, she's like, that Jeff is so bad, but he dresses great.
You're good. So, for those who don't know, Rule 100 is the definitions of terms that are used in multiple rules. So instead of going in every single rule and restating the same definition, a classic example being board, what does board mean? State Board of Education. So instead of saying that in every definition section of each rule, we stick it in Rule 100. These definitions apply to the entire administrative code for education. So we moved this definition up into Rule 100 because it's starting to be used in multiple places, and it will also serve as a definition because it will be codified in rule for where it gets utilized in other documents throughout the agency and through the state. So with that, Rule 400, we actually have not made any changes substantively to this rule from the last time you passed it in August. Board member Scott Hansen did send me some technical edits that should be showing up for you in draft 4. So most of those are just changing plurals and singulars and making sure subject-verb agreement is there. But
Consistency with junior high and all that.
yes. So with that, we'll just move to 100 if that's okay with everyone, unless there's something in 400 you really want to talk about.
Do you have any questions, board members? I have one.
Yeah, I have some, just some things to kind of help me understand this. So on line 41, and I'm sorry, I didn't get all of this prepared earlier.
Okay, as long as you talk fast. Sorry.
So I'm just wondering, it says, by July 1 of each year, each LEA shall certify to the superintendent that the LEA emergency preparedness and emergency response plan has been practiced at the school level. And I just am thinking that July 1 seems like a funny date to me because nobody's in school July 1. So what's the thinking behind that? How can the school have practiced their plans by July 1?
So the idea, as I read this, is that by July 1, for the previous school year, they would have done it. So obviously it would have to happen before school got out, but they have until July 1 to report that to us.
And that's when they fill out the assurance document.
Correct. That's when the assurance document
Oh,
goes
all
out.
right.
Yeah,
That- So
that's why that
the July 1 comes from the idea that's behind filling out the assurance statement.
That's the date.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up?
That helps me understand.
I
I had another question.
Go ahead and ask one more and then we'll go
Okay.
to board member Marsh.
So on line 146, draft 4.
I think you're looking at draft 3.
On line 46 is the one I was reading last night. Let's see, it talks about having fire drills, at least one every 2 months throughout the school year.
Mhm.
And then we talk about having all of these other kind of unique and interesting drills. And it says that during the year we'll have one of those unique drills, but we have fire drills ongoing throughout the. And I'm just wondering if maybe we shouldn't have an opportunity to practice more than one of these. How we went to that place up at the Capitol that you took us to, and they said, you know how long it's been since there's been a fire in a school? And it's been a long, long time, I think, because we're so prepared. And I'm wondering if the time and the effort might not be better applied to having, replacing one of the many fire drills we have with another of these different types of drills. That's just a suggestion.
If I may, sure.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Currently, state code
Yes.
requires it be every 2 months on fire drills.
Yeah.
So we would need to make a legislative change in order to start switching out those for different types of drills. But it is something that if you wanted to recommend, staff open a bill file and look at that. That is an
Fire
option.
chief comes to our
Mhm.
Okay, yeah.
One of the other things that goes along with that, Christy Walker heads up the school safety advisory. Collaborative, yeah, we've called it.
All kinds of things.
Oh,
nice.
a lot of
I like
different
that.
things. Collaboratives, yes, and this was a discussion item at that group. and we have the fire marshal there. And because of that group, there was legislative change to the fire code with the numbers of drills and whatnot. So that this is really a good collaborative effort with everyone at the table, Department of Public Service. Everyone was at the table to be able to discuss these and how many and how often. So I just wanted you to know that conversation is had. And then also on line 154, which might not be the same as yours because I'm looking at draft 4, it does state at a minimum, and so they can ramp that up as needed.
Board Member Marsh, you had a question?
I didn't have a question. I just had a comment to hers.
Oh, okay.
Back on the previous issue, that's also the ending of the school year for their school district to get ready to get started up. And so they finalize their budget, they finalize everything there at the end of the year. And so they'll go through and finalize, say, okay, yes, we were in compliance of that for this year. And then they set up the previous year's schedule as they go through there.
Good point.
And then also fire drills are something that are by code because of the fire marshal, but they're also possibility that they could be used in other instances. And it's a good way that if they're used to doing that and you need to make a quick immediate action, that's a good way to make it happen.
Great point.
So,
Board Member Cannon, did you have other questions?
Just an English teacher question. Online, let's see. Oh, maybe I have this. Maybe it's different.
Is it 232?
Were you an English teacher? Oh, no, my mother was.
Oh.
So on line 218, if an LEA has implemented Safe UT, the LEA shall identify one or more Safe UT liaisons who provides, communicates, and attends. Should those?
You said 218?
218, 219, 220. So I'm just wondering if we have liaisons who provides, should that be liaisons who provide? Liaisons who communicate? Liaisons who attend?
Liaisons who provide, communicate, attend. Yeah, Magical Jeff can fix that.
Yep.
Yeah, fix that Magical Jack.
One question I had, I know they have to have these drills done by April 30th. And I didn't know if it would be valuable or if there's a reason for the April 30th. I just think of April as a teacher, and I think of testing, and I think of it's just a bad month to do all that. And I know sometimes if you're at a school, you'll wait till the last minute. I don't know if there's any reason we want to do April 30th or if there's any benefit to moving that to like March 30th, just to not get in the way of testing. But I know districts have a choice, so.
The April 30th deadline actually applies to the school emergency preparedness week that they're required to have.
Oh, that's a terrible.
The drills have to occur every 2 months, fire drill, and then in the off month, a different type of drill.
Okay.
So they're happening all
Yeah,
throughout
they're
the
happening
year.
all the year. I just know that there's that. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, anything else on 400 from committee?
Okay.
Can we make a motion and then move to 100? Would that
Sure.
be?
That was the one.
Okay. Yeah, sure, go
So I
ahead.
move that we approve, let's see, it's draft 4, isn't it? R 277-400, draft 4 on first reading and send it to the board for second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that we move that the committee approve R277 draft 400 draft 4 on first and final reading, and then move to the final board.
On first reading.
On first.
Second.
And second and final reading for the board. Yeah, sorry. Is there any discussion to the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, let's go ahead and do 100, R277 100 with our definition for social emotional learning.
Yes. And if you click on draft 1, it is now actually the updated version.
Oh,
Because they were more technical in terms of, they didn't change the meaning from the original version. Wanted to clarify a couple of words. And you'll look at the definition down on line 132 of draft 1.
What is this?
And just to give you kind of the context of where this comes from, if you are familiar with CASEL, which I always forget what the acronym stands for, this is the definition that CASEL provides for social emotional learning. We did tweak it just a little on line 139. We added self-advocate as part of our own definition as something we would like to see in social emotional learning. previously, the lines 132 and 133 simply read means the process through which an individual amend those to the list. And USSA felt that saying the process through which students acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitude, and skills necessary to is more appropriate for what we're trying to seek and accomplish. So, and that was actually all taken from the Castle definition. But I don't know if Christy has anything to add to that, or if you have questions. But...
Questions from committee? Jen?
Yeah, so I liked the inclusion of social and emotional learning here. But I just want a little bit of background from you guys, saying how are we getting through? This is sort of a new concept. The governor had the big meeting about it a month or two ago. And so now we're incorporating it into rules here. How are we making sure the water gets to the end of the row and that teachers, know what we're talking about and have some idea of how to incorporate this?
Yes, there's a couple of it. I don't know if you want to start with that. But...
Yeah, I can start with that. So CASEL stands for Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, first off. So, and as far as making sure the water gets to the end of the row, I know there are many social emotional learning components to the new health standards, which are being taught. There's a lot of community support as well. There's grants that are coming out to help fund support for the health standards. There's a lot of work right now around how to vet certain providers or curriculum, and as an agency look for what's evidence-based to provide to the field around social emotional learning. So a lot of schools have been previously engaged in a social emotional learning component, understanding that emotional intelligence is equally as important as academic intelligence. And so there has already been a lot of work in the field surrounding this, that as a state agency creating uniformity and guidelines for that, we want to be sure that everybody's speaking the same language and promoting it in the same fashion.
So what I'm hearing, let me see if I understand what you're saying, is that the idea is that this will more or less be integrated throughout all subjects and in school.
And something, Chair, if I may, that's really kind of backing that up, and Sarah Young can kind of high-five me from afar in terms of correct. But this is a big part of, as we move toward competency-based education and personalized learning, this is a big element of that. And as you stated, the social-emotional learning piece gets integrated throughout the competency-based education as something that's kind of put through all the subjects. So it is to say that now we have it in rule and then tomorrow we're going to go out and train all teachers to do this immediately. I think it's going to be a little more iterative in terms of making sure that as we continue to move toward personalized learning as well, this kind of naturally folds into that movement because it's a big part of it.
Janet, and I will tell you as a teacher in my little experience, it's been folding in for several years now. Like this is just putting it in definition and it's integrated through counselors and even in English and math and all subjects, it's getting enfolded into.
A comment on that, guys. We need to remove the plural from all of those meetings, because we're talking about the process, right? Process, understand.
What line are you on?
Which students means the process through which. Is that right?
Yes, good catch.
That makes sense.
So I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear remove the plural from which section?
134 to 130.
Oh, the list. Okay.
Yeah, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
That makes sense. Means the process. So think of the process, understand, and emotions. That
Any other
the
questions?
process understands.
Let's see.
The process is singular, so.
Oh, you say process with students.
Students
I thought you meant understand the manager's emotions.
Student
Students
understands. Yep.
That's what I thought she meant.
Yeah, the old version, it was singular.
Oh, okay.
The
That would make
emotion and goal sets and issues positive goals.
Goals.
And I'm interested for you guys to look at that and make sure that let's get that grammatically correct.
We got it.
Is there some expert that goes through all these?
You guys.
Right there.
Clearly not successfully, so.
Several of us, if we don't catch it, we,
Yeah.
somebody else in the board will.
Multiple eyes.
But yes, there's.
But yes, it's called text if you see something and you'll get taken care of.
Call Jenny.
See something, say something.
Again, junior high.
And please,
Yeah.
I just wanted to commend everyone on working towards this, the
Yes.
groups that have been, because so many LEAs and the governor's office are all working towards it. I was just at the governor's early childhood commission, and there we had Karen Peterson that was speaking on behalf, saying that the governor, this is one of his prime objectives, social emotional learning, and they also look at the CASEL resources and bringing those in as well. So having that collective voice and common definitions is going to benefit everyone, so that we're all talking about the exact.
Love it. Okay. If there are no more questions, then we'll confer a motion.
Can I ask one more question?
I guess.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Just on line 99, plan for college and career readiness for SEOP. So I'm just wondering about the current status of SEOPs. It used to be that they were mandatory for every student, and I loved it because I thought, if we're trying to personalize education, we are saying that every student at least will get that one-on-one time. What is that the way it still is? What's the status of SEOPs these days?
That is a
Yes.
great question. I was
Red-
not
Red
prepared for,
knows.
but is there someone in the audience that feels,
Do you want to speak to that, right?
please?
Do you want me to?
To the latest standard?
But we call them PCCR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we're
to
changing
start
ours
right
now.
here, we could probably get rid of the term SEO. That was a bridge that was in there.
Right,
Yeah.
but I thought
Yeah.
some still use.
Right, so
Somebody,
Red,
Red, you tell us before we find out.
Yeah.
Brett Larson, School Student Safety Specialist. So I was just gonna say, I know Jerry's here too, but it is planned for college readiness to be so PCCR instead of SEOP, but because it's used in other things, including the board rule that houses the school counseling program, it's SEOP. And so, but it is, they have to have at least 2 individually with their counselor in high school. And then the others can be as in a group, but they are, it is part of that requirement in the school counseling program to meet with them twice, to have that individual appointment twice in their high school career.
Okay, so it's not every year like it used to be, but it is twice
They have the,
in high school.
yeah, they have the meeting every year, but only individually with their counselor. The minimum requirement is twice, but some do meet with them every year.
So Red, following up on that and always looking at greater efficiencies, is there something that we need to change in that arena so that we can no longer use SELP and then just come to the common term PCCR?
Let's change it.
You're gonna have to change the counseling stuff, like it,
It has to open up the board rule that encompasses the school counseling program
comprehensive.
to do that.
But that's it?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it, just
Yeah.
open up
I
everything.
don't think
That's all
Jerry's not
Yeah,
here,
right, but yeah,
But yeah, we,
so we need to change it. Well, I'm just seeing efficiencies across to no longer do those, because when I see that, I think that we're,
right, and it was in a
yeah, yeah.
former board rule that we looked at. And I
Yeah.
Yes.
It would be nice if we did.
Yeah, so that might be something.
Yeah. Do you want us to look at that moving forward?
I think that would be a great thing to look at, get that consistent and not use terms that we don't really use.
Thanks for that as well. All right, thank you. Jeff, you have that down.
Okay, good question, Jen. Okay, please.
I move that we approve R277100 on first reading and send it to the board for final reading.
The motion before the committee is to approve R277100 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Jeff, you get a
Thank
break.
you.
I know, just enjoy it.
Have some
Don't go
candy.
far.
Ben and I are on a tag team, so no, I'm not coming in.
Oh, good idea. Okay, our next action item is action item 3.3, R2773325. You guys will remember this from last month, the Public Education Exit and Engagement Survey. It looks like, Sarah, are you filling in for Jennifer?
So I'm actually your lead point of staff on
Oh,
this
you are?
project
Okay.
right now.
Okay, well.
But it falls under Jennifer's house, so you are
Well,
correct.
You're welcome. So you guys will recall that House Bill 130 requires the board to adopt rules establishing a public education exit survey. And we just had a couple of changes we wanted to see, and Sarah, if you'll talk to us about those, and Ben?
I can point out the changes that we've made to the rule. So draft 4 is the current version with all the changes that staff is recommending based on the feedback we've gotten. The first change is we added a definition for educator to make it clear which educators should be asked to take the exit and engagement surveys. You can see that on lines 17 through 21. That was a recommendation from Travis Rawlings to be consistent with some other definitions that licensing has put out. The other change we made was about access to the survey results, and that starts on line 52. Allows LEAs to, or requires LEAs to have written policies about who will access the survey results, and also preventing identification of educators who complete the survey, even though they're anonymous in some small LEAs. That could be a challenge. So we are asking LEAs to have rules regarding that. And then we also, at the very end there, just clarified that LEAs can add their own questions in, and they control dissemination of the data on the questions that they add to the model survey.
Good changes.
And then just to follow up with a couple other changes. So we did actually pilot the survey with the Hope Street Group fellow teachers recently. They gave us some feedback in regards to clarifying some components of verbiage, and also letting us know when they felt like they had some questions. We also received feedback from Sarah Jones with UEA, and we were able to make some shifts in the language kind of specific to that. All of those shifts were very minor, just in terms of clarifying the intent of the language. We only added one new question, and that is under resources. We did add a question that was specific to asking teachers if they feel they have adequate time to collaborate with their colleagues.
We know her answer to that.
To your point, Sarah Jones felt like that was a key concern, and wanted to make sure.
That?
So that is going to be
That's in the model survey.
In the model survey, and it is now. Let me scroll down. I can give you the question number. It's under resources. Hold on. Recognition. Oh, here it is. So it's technically question 88, which reads, I have adequate time to collaborate and plan with my colleagues. So just to be clear, 88, because I hear the question.
Sorry,
no
wonder we don't have time.
So a couple of pieces. So the way the questions are numbered is not indicative in terms of that every question is received by every educator. So explicitly, there is a question in there that has a logic to it, where it asks, are you planning on being a teacher in 2 years' time? If you respond disagree or strongly disagree, we then ask a follow-up question, which is, do you see yourself leaving the profession or going to a different school? Based on your response there, you get a block of questions, which are all included in the model, but that's going to be specific to those individuals who respond to trigger those. In terms of Hope Street Group Fellows, I timed them.
You did. Okay,
in terms of just knowing how long it took. So most teachers were finished in around 5 minutes. The longest individual was 7 minutes and 50 seconds. So we did feel like that we wanted to make sure it was a reasonable amount of time, and we weren't, asking for hours and hours and hours. Because it's a 5-point Likert scale, on most of them, it's a pretty quick, and then the sentences are short. It's a pretty quick read. This is how I feel.
Oh, that makes me feel better. Thanks for telling me.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions or?
Well, yeah. So you mentioned you did some things with Sarah Jones' questions, but I thought her questions were really penetrating, and I went back and looked at it. So could you just kind of follow up on a few of these?
Sure.
So is there an end size at the building level?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of the reporting out on the dashboards, we are using an N size of 10 in terms of we won't share any data specific to an LEA that has less than 10 respondents. And that's true of building out of the state dashboard as well as of the local dashboards that they will use.
Thank you. And then who has access?
It's a great question.
To this data?
Yeah, so the rule refers to that an LEA shall adopt model policies in regards to clarifying that. So
Not
one,
a model policy, but
a written policy, pardon me, thank you. So the steps in that, we actually started with the HR directors, and Travis Rawlings, our coordinator of our licensing, brought those questions to the HR directors to ask for. She's here.
No, we were just speaking about you.
Yeah.
I know. It's called the Sarah Jones rule.
So we did, we asked some of those questions about their current practices. And what we found was that they were very diverse. And so that different districts have kind of different expectations. And so for us to kind of move forward and say this is how everyone has to do it could cause a lot of challenges. So instead we wanted to be honoring of those local cultures around how they handle data, and that's why we chose to approach it that way.
So I don't think that I got my question answered. Can the principal access this data?
So it'll be specific to the written policy that the LEA adopts at a local level. So each district and or charter school will be clarifying how that works for their particular community.
But I think you're worried about the anonymity.
Yes, I'm
Right,
worried about
but
that.
so just because they get the data doesn't mean they'll know who it belongs to.
Yeah, so there's no names in this. There's no identifying features. I think the other thing that we clarified with UEA was that from USBE standpoint, we are telling the LEAs to give the survey, but there's nothing that actually compels an individual to have to take the survey and or to answer all of the questions. So
The other thing I would add is that the other required component to their policy is that they have steps to take to protect anonymity of the people that take the survey. So each LEA has to determine who can have access and also determine how to protect the data for their LEA.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question then, Jen?
Yeah, Sarah, I thought your questions were so good, and I looked at them again, and I just thought, oh, I don't know if they're answered yet or not, so just following up.
May I?
Sarah, do you want to tell us if things were addressed? Do you feel comfortable or?
You've seen draft
Sarah,
four.
I do have draft 4.
Pretty good.
and you've got an email like 10 minutes ago that has V3 that's posted.
Oh, for the survey
with
itself.
your feedback.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sarah Jones with UEA. First of all, thank you so much to Jennifer and to Sarah and to Ben for doing more updates. It was really helpful to be able to have a conversation. So we want to see as many teachers as possible take this survey. Yes. I think that's the goal. And I just know they'll feel more comfortable the more they feel like there won't be potential retribution or just discomfort because they can't be completely honest about leadership in their building. So I do think this addresses those concerns. Maybe the one, I don't know if I'd call it a remaining concern, it's just kind of a reality, is that because we want LEA level data, there are some very small charters and very small districts where we might not get any data if people feel like participating at all doesn't keep them anonymous, because there's just a dozen or two educators, and you're the only first year educator in that school, or you're the only one leaving that particular year. And so maybe once you get the pilot survey back and see if, I'm not sure the way around that because you want the LEA level data, but there might need to be some exceptions for allowing people to take it as just a state educator versus an LEA educator, so you get the perspective of that.
That's a great point.
So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve R277325 draft 4 on first reading and send it to the board for second and final reading.
Okay, we have a motion before the committee to move R277325 draft 4 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Yes, the discussion was already done, wasn't it? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you.
work. Okay. Our next action item. Oh, you guys are so smooth in the transitions. I feel like you practiced this yesterday.
Yeah, I'm like up on the ropes in the ring and I just ran myself back in.
Okay, we have action item, we have item R277724, criteria for sponsors recruiting daycare facilities and the child and the adult care food program.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up.
And here, before we dive too deep, I teased this yesterday with Board Member Gravitt. There's a slight reveal I wanted to give with this rule that has nothing to do with the rule itself.
Okay.
But we have Kathleen Britton with Child Nutrition Program and Jody McGill with this program. And there's another staff member who helps with this program as well named Clay Martin. He is not able to attend today, he's not here, but the reason I bring Clay up is as I was discussing this rule with Clay earlier this week, I mentioned it was in this committee and that you were the chair.
Yeah.
And he mentioned.
I was going to say, I go to high school with him.
No.
Did I teach him?
You
Oh, that's hilarious. I can't tell the difference because I think I'm still 10. Oh, that's hilarious.
But he did want
Did
me
he
to
tell you
tell
any
you.
secrets?
Oh, no. Wait, it gets better.
Sorry.
He actually wanted you to know that he was a very troubled student when he had you, and he credits you as being one of the teachers that changed his life.
Aww.
So, and he wanted you to know he turned out well and he now works for you.
I'm gonna go home and look him up in my Oh my gosh, that's so happy. Let's take a moment. That could be a generic name. I go to school with him.
So, this rule was up for continuation a few months ago, and we were low on time, so we continued it with the formatting edits to come later. So now we've taken the time to do the formatting edits. There is nothing substantive being changed in this rule. We're just updating it so it's compliant with the rule writing manual style guide. This rule generally is, as the title suggests, it's the criteria for sponsors to recruit daycare facilities to provide food to those daycare facilities. There were some questions we got earlier about, so Susie runs a daycare in her house down the street. Does she qualify for this program? I'm going to toss it to Kathleen to kind of give like the overview of what this program is. She does a great job of explaining it in language I think we can all understand, but it's a fascinating program and I wanted to make sure you guys had some context.
So it necessarily isn't just like we give them money for food, but it's on a reimbursement basis like we do for the schools too. So it's funding for breakfast, lunch, snacks, supper. But I also have here with me Jody McGill, who's the coordinator over the CACFP side too. So she's really the expert more than me on it because that's all she deals with every day. So correct me if I'm not correct here.
I just want to make a little point because you just mentioned, so this is paid on a reimbursement basis. So is this all federal money?
Yes. Yes.
It's an entitlement program.
It's a what?
It's an entitlement program.
Okay.
So there aren't any limits to what money
Yeah,
you can get.
Why don't you come to the table and introduce yourself?
So with it being titled, classified as an entitlement program, there isn't any limit to the number of sponsors that we can have on the program. And those sponsors can then serve reimbursable meals to get federal reimbursement for those meals that they're served. So it's just contingent upon how many we have on the program that are eligible and how many eligible meals are actually claimed. And then we pay reimbursement for any of those.
And so some of the questions was what Title 20 was. Title 20 is through the DWS funds. So those are funds that these daycare homes or centers receive for daycare subsidies for families, low-income families. And so then those children automatically qualify for these meals and they don't have to pay for the meals. It's kind of like in schools with direct certification that if they're on Medicaid or SNAP or food assistance programs, they don't have to fill out all the paperwork that goes with it. So I know that was one of the questions with this. Was there other questions?
Yeah, committee, do you have other questions for our experts, Janet?
I would just like you to give us some information about maybe some examples of who are the sponsoring organizations, and then you talk about recruited facilities must have a prospective sponsoring organization. And I think that it's kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around this program because I'm so used to programs not having enough money and being restricted by this and that and the other, and I think I have to think differently about this one because this one says you can have whatever you feel you need. So will you explain to me about the sponsors and the prospective sponsors and who those organizations are and give me examples?
So, sure, that was a difficult thing for me to get my head wrapped around when I came over childcare because I was used to being at schools. How I kind of wrapped my head around it was a sponsoring agency, a director, like the family daycare home sponsors, would be like an LEA. And then all the sponsors are the schools underneath it. So you have somebody that basically is like the administration, and then they have all the homes underneath it that they administer. We, as an agency, help them succeed, just like we help the LEAs succeed.
So would you be sponsoring?
We are not. Just like we're not sponsoring a school district, we are helping them.
So who would be sponsoring these little daycares?
You want to take
examples? Can you
So,
give us?
so to be eligible to participate on the Child and Adult Care Food Program and to be a sponsor, there are two different types. There can be a nonprofit that has a 501c3, so a nonprofit organization can be a sponsor. And then there can be for-profit sole proprietorships that can also be sponsors on the program. There are different rules attached to each of those, but those can be sponsors. Then there is a sponsor that in order for a family daycare home provider to participate on the program, they cannot participate on the program as an independent sponsor. They have to go under a nonprofit because the federal money flows through our agency to those sponsors, and anyone that's a daycare home provider has to be underneath the sponsor. And then that sponsor, in a sense, becomes the partner with the state agency to oversee that those homes are following all the required regulations.
So do you have examples of each type of sponsoring organization and who they sponsor?
Like Inca and...
So we have 6 nonprofit family daycare sponsors that sponsor various numbers of homes. Some of them have 100 homes, some of them have 200 homes underneath them. We also have what we classify as dual sponsors. So they can be a nonprofit sponsor and they can sponsor home providers, and then they can also sponsor unaffiliated centers that they don't own. So that's just the terminology. If it's an unaffiliated center.
I mean, to some of these.
Yeah, like Rockabye Baby, and what's that one I see every time I drive down 70?
So, for example, a sponsor would be, we have ABC Great Beginnings. So ABC Great Beginnings is a sponsor, and there are multiple ABC Great Beginnings because it's a sponsor that has basically a business and they own multiple daycare centers. So that would be called a sponsor of affiliated centers because all of those centers are affiliated to that business.
And
they all have one EIN number. And then
that helps.
And then if there are multiple EIN numbers, they become their own legal entity because they're not affiliated with each other because the EIN numbers are different. So that's kind of how it all.
And then give us an example of a for-profit organization that does this.
A for-profit center, we have one called Puddle Jumpers. They're incorporated, so that's a DBA, so they go by Magic 5 Incorporated, which is a sole proprietorship. They can go by a DBA,
which is
doing business as. And so we have organizations that are considered for-profit sole proprietorships. In order for those particular types of facilities to participate, they have to meet 25% free and reduced eligibility for either basing that off of their enrollment or their license capacity each month in order to be eligible to claim.
So they could service 75% of people who aren't in need and still be on the program.
It's different levels of funding they receive, just like at schools. Every child receives some kind of federal subsidy, and most people don't realize that. So like my children I don't qualify for free and reduced, but every time my child eats, they get subsidies for that paid lunch. I pay into it, the government pays into it.
That's why my lunch costs more than the kids.
Exactly.
Because I'm a school lunch.
Yeah. And most people don't realize that the government is subsidizing everybody.
Right. Do they ever look at the amount of food that's wasted?
In daycares?
Yeah, in this program, does anybody look at whether or not the food that's being paid for is going to use or is it being wasted?
We don't necessarily look at.
I don't know that I have seen in my years working in child nutrition, because I've been on the school side and then I've been on the CSAMP side for over almost 20 years. I've not seen them do any type of research study on waste in the CSAMP program. I have been part of that as a school food service director, but not for the child and adult care food program.
I think that helps me. Thank you.
Okay, good. Good questions. Any other questions or board members have? Is there anybody who wants to make a motion?
Make it.
Well, I can.
You can keep it rolling.
Motion maker
We're proud of you.
Hanson. Motion maker.
I move that we approve R277724 draft 1 on first reading and send to the board for second final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve R277724 draft 1. Okay. On first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much for your information.
Thank you.
It's kind of so fun to learn about all these things. All the things you never knew. Come to board and do it. Thank you. Okay, there's Jennifer. Okay, so we're going to do the standards revision process. I don't know why this is so exciting to me. I just really like it.
I feel the same way.
I feel like we kind of gave birth to it. I had that experience, but it's exciting. So the goal was kind of to improve the feedback process with this, and I think Jennifer has put together something that maybe addresses that. So why don't you go ahead and talk about the standards revision process?
All right, so standards revision, we've done this a number of times.
We have, but it's always such good sequels.
We got down to 8 steps, we're back to 12 steps, but the 12-step process, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You need 12 steps to really make it through.
I'm not any of us would know.
We have a sponsor, it's going to be great. So within the process, it's very similar to what we had before. One of those steps in the process never accounted for. If we went to the review committee and they said nothing needed to happen, there was nothing in our process that allowed us to stop the process. So I added a little line on that. And the big change is really towards the end where we start having a special session for board members to come and do standards. So it wouldn't actually come when they're ready after public feedback has been received and we've revised the draft. That draft would be released for a period of time for board members to give their feedback. We would compile all of that feedback into one document, come with suggestions of, based on that feedback, what the standard could look like, and then board members in a special session, so a meeting outside of your board meetings, would go through those revisions all together, so there won't be a committee meeting that then continues on in board meeting the following month. Those of you that were here when we went through health and science, we continued them, right? I think, Mark, you had the pleasure of not being here for those.
Mark, it was kind of fun. A little bit.
I think we spent 11 to 12 hours on each of those.
Yes.
This actually reduces your time, and you will be able to do your board meeting work. It does add a day to your time as well. Given our track for when standards are up, it should only be one additional day a year, given we have preschool will be your first iteration of this, and then after preschool, if it's not working the way we were hoping, it's really to validate board member comments so that everybody on the board has the feel that they get to input on standards. Although not everyone gets the pleasure of being on this particular committee, everybody would like to be on this committee, especially with standards.
My question is, though, one board member can want something and the other 14 don't. So how are you going to evaluate that?
So we're going to.
That's my question too.
So the goal, at least my intention is, we would put it on the comments, and then you guys go through like you have of we're going to vote on each one. And so everybody's gets validated in terms of a vote,
And we vote
but
in
we
special
don't knock it off. Yeah, so
Okay.
special session. We would just need a quorum of board members. So if some people are like, yeah, I don't really care, they can just, not show up. But we would need a quorum of board members to be able to approve those. But we want to really recognize every board member has the right to have feedback. And sometimes that feedback gets lost in the busyness of standards and trying to squeeze it into a 3-hour committee meeting that you have 8 other agenda items and then into full board meeting. Given how much interest and input there's been in standards as of late, it just makes more sense to give the dedicated time and opportunity for board members' voices to be heard and voted on one way or the other.
Well, and also we did a couple of big ones, science and health.
Yeah, they have a little more controversial topic.
Yeah,
but you've got social studies coming after pre-K, and social studies will be additional.
I'm kind of on the fence about this because, I've been on every committee now.
Yeah.
And law and licensing has a lot of rules I would love to give input to, but I'm not on that committee. And so I have to wait till it comes to the full board, or I have to talk to somebody on the board that's in that committee to change and say we're going to do standards differently and take that out of the committee. I'm not sure.
So it would stay in committee up until the point that we get the public feedback in that revision, and I think it still comes to you guys with like, here's where we are, here's what the public has said, and you get to weigh in. Yeah, no, I totally understand. I don't know what the
Right.
Yeah.
And so help me if I'm clarifying this wrong. So everything remains the same, except for after it leaves this committee going to the full board as part of the full board meeting, it goes to this committee. After this committee, it goes to the full board as a special session. And then, so it accomplishes the same goal.
So we still go through everything as our committee?
Yes, yes. It allows for that more time in the full board session. And so it goes through everything here the same. Then at the end of this, and we're able to put it out there, gather everyone's feedback and comments, have a collective document for all of you to look at, and then during the special time, so it's not in addition to, so there's not a 12-hour day for a board meeting, so it just captures that time and puts it here instead.
Well, and I think there's some protections in place, because this is the issue for me, is I don't want one person, 2 people, for example, to negate the efforts of the public or the efforts of teachers or the efforts of parents,
Right.
So I think we have this protective factor that we come in and we
Well,
can look
it
at all
seems
of the
like
comments.
what happened in committee sometimes then got not overrun, but just it had to be revisited in full board, and so we can still. The process is it still comes to committee, but the special session takes it out of trying to squeeze it into board meetings that are already very full agendas.
So it might be the same time there's going to be.
Yeah, so like
And
T&L will.
as needed. For example,
because
there's a smaller area and there's not as much controversy or input or. Yeah,
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yes.
Yeah, so the year we have world language and library, those are going to go pretty quick compared to social studies or when we come back.
Science and health.
Yeah, English language arts we'll see, but there's not as many controversial topics. We want kids to read, write, and talk, right? Like that's not going to be, hopefully. We don't put books in there, so we're good.
Right, I was going to say.
Right.
Well, I think this feels like.
So this is the kind of trying to meet in the middle around letting people's voices be heard without taking up your important board meeting time. So that if there's a way to make it even better, that's great. But this is kind of taking the old process and just adding that additional layer.
Well, and I love how clear it is. I love that you've got the rules there and the statute and policies.
And this is something our staff is currently working on, developing templates and strategies so that each time you go through this, you see the same kind of form. So the implementation plan we'll have a template for. We'll have a template for the review committee feedback so that you'll use the template rather than the content will be what you can really attend to rather than figuring out
and
what we're
still
doing.
will be under 2 years.
Yes.
Because I was a little bit worried about that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm just wondering if we need to make an amendment that Patty suggested that we will do the additional meeting as necessary or as needed.
So if we don't feel like it's going to be a controversial hot topic, it doesn't have to have a full board. Yeah, we could definitely put that on there.
Do you want to make that motion, Jen?
Okay, I will move approval of the core standards revision process with an amendment that we include a full board meeting to review the standards only as needed.
put as needed in here.
Yeah.
To be necessary.
So, should we do the amendment first and then go back to the motion, or can we do that together? I think we have to the amendment. Okay, so first of all, let's take care of that. So the motion before the committee is to add the words as needed, or something similar if you like different words, to the full board's, it's called a special session or something. Yeah.
That's what it's kind of like the legislature. We're going to pull you back in.
Yeah, I was like special
I'm going to have to
session.
budget for this,
It's like
be able to pay you the
step
same
11.
things, that kind of thing. So,
Okay, so the motion is to add the words as needed by special session. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all those, Ms. Dr. Patty Norman.
So, it's not my place to have discussion to this motion, but I just wanted to bring something up really quick.
Okay.
It might need to be something said in step 9, that after the revised draft is there, then a decision needs to be made whether we go to the next step. So I'm not sure if it's in step 10, because in step 10, that actually makes it sound like we're not going to be providing more the opportunity for
Right.
feedback, which we want, but the question is whether a special session is had, not whether or not the full board gets the opportunity.
so I'm going to add decision made by Standards and Assessment Committee as to which kind of pathway to
Yeah,
take.
whether it needs a special
And you would
session
put that in
or-
step 9.
I'm almost wondering if
It
I
needs to be
break it at
if
step
this,
9
then
and then
that.
it has
If
two
that,
different.
okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So we'll have two different pathways. So if we feel like there's not going to be that much emotion behind this, we'll go down the Standards and Assessment says yes, it goes to full board for approval. If we feel like the board has given an indication that we want to have a grander discussion, then we'll go down this pathway. So it'll kind of break into two tables at the bottom is what I'm picturing.
So the real motion, no, thank you, Patty. The real motion is that okay, Janet, that she, you know, but really, because that's what you wanted. Is to, what Jennifer said, make 2 columns to decide if a special session is needed. That would probably be in step 9.
Yeah, so it's step 9 and then it'll shorten one process and one will be the
I
length
love
that
the
it is
idea
now.
of boxes and visuals.
I just need a
Oh.
flow chart for me.
I need somebody to make a flow
I make
chart.
all this for me at this point, like so I can help
All
staff.
those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that amendment passes. Now we're back to, well, we're not back to any original motions. It hasn't been made. But if somebody would like to make it.
I'll make the motion that we approve the standards revision process as amended.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the revised standards revision process as amended. Any discussion to that motion? I guess I'm send it to the full board.
Okay, I'll update it. Do you guys want to see it before it goes to full board?
Trust you, but I mean, do you
I-
guys want to see it?
I'm happy to email it so you can at least.
Yeah, you can email it to us.
I always hate when
I've
we
yet
make
to
that kind
see
of
a
drastic
diagram
change.
that I have a picture of, or do I do that with mine?
All right, I'll take that as a compliment.
You teachers, just kidding. Just kidding, I didn't use that. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Jennifer, thank you.
My pleasure.
Now you're staying, aren't you?
I am here.
Because you're on another exciting one, which I think this is very cool. This is just a discussion item, and it's the core standards rubric results, because as per board policy 3002, staff was obligated to go ahead and run through this, share the results from the core standards rubric, and I can't even believe it. It works. I'm so impressed. Jennifer, tell us why it works.
Yes, right. So this was kind of came up in committee of our process for standards provision and knowing, do we have like a trigger that tells us when and when it should be queued? So it works because if you go through the standards and look at the year they were revised and our current timeline for revision, this actually matches perfectly. So, yeah.
So community factors comes out 0 a lot. So tell me what community factors are, and I'm wondering where we factor in, since we're going to be talking about a little bit later, the student advisory committee recommendations.
Oh, that's great.
Where do we factor those in? Is there a place we can do that?
So that one will go into our stakeholders. So in community factors, there's only 2 questions, and I think that's some reason it comes out as 0 a lot. But it says, are the standards neutral concerning philosophies and pedagogies? So trying to keep in that neutral space that we're not on one spectrum or the other, but that we either represent both or we remain neutral. And then our stakeholders, which is educators, parents, community members, etc., requesting a change. And what we haven't implemented yet, which is part of this process moving forward, is using the results from an annual core standards survey to help us inform that. But we could use the student piece as a component. But what we have is the percentage of the population expressing a concern. So it gets pretty small. Less than 5% is no point, and up to 25% or more would get the full point value. So it would take a concentrated body to really say that there's an issue in the standards. And the reason that staff has to put zero.
When I was out campaigning, people talked about me about the
ELA.
language arts more than anything. And so I know that there's interest out there, so that's.
I think right now we don't have a stakeholder mechanism to gather that feedback at the state level. So I'm working on the survey development of getting that feedback annually. It's just we haven't implemented the annual survey, but that's part of this big process you all help to define.
Student advisory committee to have some.
Absolutely.
I feel like their input is valuable.
And I can even add them.
Factor them in somehow.
I can add them to the rubric.
So that we know
that
they're getting input.
I will do it right now.
That's okay.
Yep, that's easy. Where is it? Oh, it's this one.
Jennifer, did you want to tell us? I know you're.
I'm just trying to update it so it's done. This way I walk out of meetings and accomplished. Yes.
Did you want to tell us more about how it worked and
So as you look
the
at
number that triggered the
right. So as you look at the values from driver's ed, which was just done in 2018, they scored 0. There hasn't been, input from the field saying this needs to change. But as you move just to the second item with English language arts, which is queued for revision for next year based on our timeline, they have a 0.4. And what you'll see is kind of 0.4 seems to be the tipping point for standards revision. Right now, the only one beating it out are things we already have queued, which is preschool, which is coming to you very soon, which is here today actually to say we're ready to send out the draft. And then right below that is social studies, which just started into revision. So the rubric actually does seem to be working and queuing things appropriately based on our timeline of revision, which is really great. This was kind of an experiment at best, and it turned out to be a positive one. So you'll see the next one with PE, that's probably down this, and it's queuing. It basically at that time it'll be ready. So in terms of is the annual assessment producing results in line with what we were expecting? It is. So we're not seeing the need in anywhere that we aren't already planning on revising early. The intent of this is if we saw a need earlier, you all could queue a revision outside of the timeline. But right now, there's nothing that's not already queued up for revision that isn't already showing here. So.
Any other comments or questions from committee members or anyone from the audience?
So I'm looking at social studies. Score for each factor is 0.5. Is that what we're supposed to look at
So yeah, that's a good question.
to determine the need for revision?
So
under score for each factor.
Yeah, so that's those. They have different values. So I just lost my page, so I think I shut it. But so academic factors is our largest. Community factors we haven't, again, because we don't have a mechanism for that feedback. It's hard to know. Implementation factors though are a barrier as well. So with that 0.45 in the very right corner of that table is the score out of a 1.0 is kind of, so it's halfway to fully being red alert.
Okay. Show me on mine. So
yours does not show what it should show. You're missing the total. I'll show her yours because this is why she asked the question. So there is a total in the corner. Does yours not have a total in the corner?
They're all on this next page.
That's page 3 and 4. Okay.
That's awkward. Okay, I apologize for
I
that.
see.
There's the scores. There they are. That's not very helpful. I'm glad you asked.
No, I had to figure that out because.
And I'm wondering, as this goes on to the board, if we can have some sort of a rubric that goes along with it, like how many it could be, there's 2 questions.
Like a total?
And these were what questions that fed into this,
Because those are going to be asked.
I can attach I can send that. I just added the SAC to it, so I'll attach that and the total points value. I think the total points is on the left, so the points is there, but knowing what they're actually accounting for, we can attach that.
Yeah, and then just fix that formatting. Yeah, I knew that when I
I'll
looked at
PDF.
Yeah, we just
it, so you don't have that problem.
I was like, what are these loose numbers? And then I was like, let me go back. I thought it was
funky, huh?
Except Jennifer.
We can do that, and then I'm going to PDF
This
this.
needs to be a PDF. Yeah.
She'll
do it. She's probably doing it right now.
It's almost done.
She's speeding. Okay, well, any other discussion? think this is great. I think it was
Yeah, I'm
good
so
to,
excited.
I feel like it's worked, yeah. It's so exciting.
It was kind of exciting because I'd only done a few test runs, and so to do all the
I
stats.
feel like, great.
Okay, I have
very
PDF'd it,
good.
so we won't have that problem, and then sending the questions. So if this board wants to see those questions, they'll have them.
Okay, I think you're still up, Jennifer.
I am. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. We don't. So our next, this one's an action item. It's the resource vetting process. As you know, we have resources that are valued by teachers that support the standards implementation, but there's feeling that we need to be able to vet some of those things or have a process for that. So Jennifer, please talk to us about your next.
Yeah, so it kind of arose through some of the documents we provide. So we do things like core guides or guidance documents and those types of things. And a couple board members came concerned about some core guides we were making in health about the content and the material and the appropriateness of that material or accuracy of some of those pieces. And so we don't really have a process, and this has come up for years since I've worked here of, do core guides come to the board? Do they not come to the board? What pieces come and what pieces don't? Knowing you guys have a lot of stuff to review, and we produce a lot of documents out of this agency. So the proposal is this resource vetting process. So when staff engages with LEAs or themselves, in some cases, if it's a guidance document like on a rule or something, that there is a vetting process that goes through to make sure it is kind of looking at certain pieces that could be problematic if we don't have a nice final review. So it's a 5-step process. Basically, we identify a need for some resource document. So let's go with the core guide for health. Health standards came out. We developed a core guide to help support implementation for teachers of here's some suggested activities that might help. Here's how it aligns to the previous standards. Here how it aligns to other core standards, so on. We pulled in LEAs and teachers and district staff to help us develop those. Then we moved from development into initial vetting. The people on that team would then take a look at that entire document because you might just work on a section of it, you might work on a section. Eventually it becomes one cohesive document, and that development team would kind of go through the first phase of vetting. At the very bottom of the document you have are kind of what they would look at when they're vetting the materials. So there's 7 kind of criteria that they would go through and say, okay, does this align to current law or policy? So is there something specific, especially in health standards, we would need that. Alignment to standards or code or rule. So depending on the resource, which one makes sense. Does it tie well? Are there any issues that we have? Alignment to relevant research or evidence base. Are the materials we have accurate in that way? 4 is accuracy of information. So it's the information that we collected or procured makes sense. Developmentally appropriate given the age. So in health, there might be a resource that would only be appropriate for 4th grade and up. We wouldn't want it referenced in 2nd grade, for example. Access to resource does not require sharing personal information. So that's where if we send you to a website and it requires you to enter an email to be able to get access, we would avoid those kinds of resources because we're not trying to build up people's businesses through us sharing our personal information. So that would be, they would check any links or places we're sending people to make sure you don't have to enter personal information to gain access. And then accessible without bias, limited or no advertising or political interest. So trying to consider those political pieces behind it as well. So having the development team go through that because they're going to be most intimately aware with what resources they provide in through those review criteria. Next would be the secondary vetting process is when we release it to the field as a draft. So it goes out for a kind of a 30-day feedback period where the field can look at it, give us any feedback they notice right away that we can say, okay, we can revise that, and then we finalize the materials based on release. That's at that point we think we're done in terms of the document. But if we receive a concern from a stakeholder of any kind, that will be routed to Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman in this case and Student Achievement. She'll then find the appropriate staff and we will organize a critical review committee. Probably 4 or 5 folks that have diverse opinions and perspectives to make sure that it's not one perspective because those are going to be the complaints we are more likely to get. And so making sure we have a broad enough perspective team to kind of look at the complaint and address that with some kind of response to the person that sent in the complaint. And our goal is to be able to have that committee's recommendation and staff response like, okay, the committee said this, staff's going to do this, and routed to the person within 10 to 14 days. So we'll have this critical review committee and we're probably going to need help identifying stakeholders for that. But as we get concerns, we do want to have a broad base. So in library, when I used to run library, this is pretty common when people would buy challenge books, you needed a diverse set of opinions to say, do we keep this book? Do we ban this book from our students in our LEA? Or do we allow parents and children to make that decision? And that's kind of where we're at in terms of having a critical review committee like that with diverse perspectives to be the ones to say, here's the recommendation, here's how staff needs to change this or not change it, and that feedback goes back to the complaint. So these materials would not actually come to you at the board level. We produce a lot of things, and I think you'd be inundated with materials if that were the case. But we do need a process for vetting. This has been a conflict for years at the agency. We've never really had one. We just kind of deal with it like ad lib, and this gives us a more formal process to address concerns, but also to ensure the quality of our materials. Sometimes staff gets working so quickly that it's still quality, but it could be, if we went through a little bit more vetting, it could be even cleaner quality in that way. So
give
that's
people more confidence. I
yeah,
think.
absolutely.
Yeah. Because
So
if you have a situation like we've had lately, it would go through number 5.
Yep,
That would be
exactly.
a concern. That there would be a process for it, and it would be resolved in 10, 14 days.
yes, that is the plan.
And Patty wouldn't be sleeping, but she'd be really busy. She doesn't sleep anyway.
She just gets to assign it to someone.
Yeah. Okay. I like that, because I know there's been some concerns about that, but the
Absolutely.
process is there.
We don't have a process. So right now you're like, what do I do to get this fixed? Or who
So
do I
then
get
it's
to?
hard for you guys, because you're just getting,
Well, and you get diverse
Whoever.
perspectives. Right? It's like some people are fine and some people are not. And so this gives us a process to respond to that. And a committee that makes the ultimate decision, that it's not staff saying yes or no.
yes.
It's not one board member saying change it, but there's a
It's not
committee
the
that has
loudest
the
person.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So that's the point, is to kind of mitigate that, but have a process for it.
Okay, I move that we approve the resource vetting process and send it to the board for approval.
Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the vetting resources and forward it to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yay.
All right.
Work.
Now I'm
Yeah.
at the table.
Now it's the Jamie show.
Yeah, but she's not going.
And Jessica.
Yeah. I'll just stay. Just in case. I'll slide up a chair. Okay. Or down a chair.
This was a lot to read. It was.
Oh, come on, you didn't get through all the 78 pages?
This lady did.
She probably did.
Well,
And then some.
I thought it was good.
I enjoyed
She
it.
couldn't stop reading. It was her nighttime reading. It kept her up. She wanted to get the next chapter because of suspense.
Right?
So you're
And
dealing with.
should I tell you what I loved about it? There were
Will.
a couple of things I loved.
Let me just tell you, for those out in the field, in the atmosphere, who are looking at this, we are on item 3.8, early learning standards for ages 3 through 5 draft. The writing committee has completed their first draft of the Utah Early Learning Standards, and they're requesting approval for a 90-day review.
Correct.
Correct. So, may Janet speak?
Either that or I can give you my little spiel for people that are out
Just,
there
she
that may
feels so
not know what we're
excited.
doing. I would be more than happy to hear what you have to say, Jan.
I just wanted to say that I read through these and I love the inclusion of phonological awareness
Of course. It's
and
research.
phonics.
Of course.
Right?
And I love that it included mental and emotional health.
Thank you.
Okay, please.
Well, I was just going to say we've been working on this process. They were last revised in 2013, and we just wanted to make sure that we're writing them for both public and private preschool programs. And so it includes all 7 content areas, and we would just like to propose that the Standards and Assessment Committee recommend this to full board as a draft for public review. So that's all.
Yeah, for a 90-day public review. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah.
For number 7?
So we had a brief discussion about this because this is one of the things that NASB has proposed, aligning standards for, they say birth through 3rd grade, but this encompasses that area. So
This includes
I'm wondering, how do we provide access to this really wonderful document for people out there? How are we going to do that?
we plan to put it on our website.
So it would be accessed on the website?
Yes. It can be accessed on the website for anybody that wants to see
Just
it.
like
Any
the other
states.
standards.
Yep.
And are we going to let people know that it's there? Or do you get
We
questions?
plan to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they go there, people who are early
Yes.
child.
And a lot of parents find my phone number there, so they'll be able to find. But there's parents that know that we have a website, so it'll be able to, and we'll spread the word. And I think the field can help spread that word as well to parents. So that's
I'm
where it's
sending it
located.
to my daughter who has 3 little tiny kids. This is really good. Here's this.
It's the day after they're born. Got standards for
phonics.
You have things that need to happen.
Any other questions or comments? Heading on.
So this was something that we had talked about internally, we just want to make everything transparent.
Good.
Because that's what we like, is feedback on this. So right now, we have going at a parallel pace, the standards revision
It's
process.
another item
It's
today.
the next
Okay.
item. Yeah. Patty, not
Okay.
yet.
All right.
Coming.
Just wanted to make sure.
3.9.
Thank you.
Always gonna let us
I know.
Next
Okay.
chapter.
Well, because I'm trying to be transparent.
Stop
Not-
that. In a minute.
Okay. I'll keep it secret for now.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Do you want a motion?
Yes, I would love a motion.
I recommend that the committee present the early Utah learning standards, ages 3 through 5, to the board for the 90-day public review.
That's so exciting. Okay, so the motion before the committee is to approve the release of the Utah Early Learning Standards, ages 3 through 5, for a 90-day public review. Any discussion of that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Yay!
This
I
day
know
has
you
come.
stress about yours, but you guys have worked so hard. And don't go anywhere because you're on again.
Oh, thanks.
Candy.
Are you candy?
Second round,
I
anybody?
liked how you said what
You're only allowed one round.
later.
be doing, and you can see how you're building on all of these skills. I thought that was really so good.
I like that
Thank you very
you're.
much.
Okay, 3.9 is revision consideration of early learning standards. And I think this committee will remember last month we talked about the burden on early childhood professionals just learning new standards. And so why not, Jennifer, this is for you, improve efficiency and reduce redundancy. I learned that from the best.
That's what I do.
I got a tattoo.
Efficiency reduced.
Anyway, talk to us about how you're going to improve efficiency and reduce redundancy.
We would like to propose that as the other standards are being brought up in the other content areas, that the preschool or the early learning standards will simultaneously be brought in that content area. So instead of redoing their whole entire document that takes 7 different content areas and changing it all at one time, being able to do it. So as social studies comes up this next year, which we've already talked with him, we can't predict what his writing committee is going to recommend, but just kind of like some of the standard or some of the highlights that may need to be hit. But as that comes up next year for social studies, that the early learning standards would also be aligned at that time. And so then as that comes up, they only have one content area as a field to get used to. And then the next year when English language arts comes up, then they would do English language arts. So we would like them to simultaneously be run.
This gets right at board member Cannon's idea around this vertical alignment, right? Between birth to grade 3 is, right now we have kindergarten and everybody else, and we have preschool, which is not a way to vertically align. So although our staff does the best they can, everybody changes their standards and then we're behind really quickly. So the vertical alignment gets distorted. And in this way, it becomes a pre-K-12 system instead of pre-K, K-12. Right, and it affords better for students. So.
Patty, did you want to add to the transparency?
Please.
Yeah, but it really didn't address this question. So we can finish on this. There's a different.
Oh, okay, you have different.
Yeah.
Another secret.
It's another.
Oh my gosh, I should
Wow.
have.
Who knew?
Yeah.
So you can finish this.
Do we have any other comments on what we're talking about now? I think we now want to know your secret.
Well, and it doesn't have to do with this motion. It's so if
We
go
haven't
back
even
to
made a
the-
motion yet.
All right, to the standards revision process.
Yeah.
And the transparency is, are you including this in the new standards revision process, or are we following the old process to finish out these standards? So if we look back at the standards revision process draft on item 3.5, and we go through it, we would actually right now be on step 6 let's see, 90-day brief. Okay, so right now we would be on step 8 in the new draft, if that gets approved. So then at that point, we would say, we would not have the dichotomy of being able to say it's going to go down this path or this path. So I think as a committee, that's going to be asked in the full board. Are we using this new way of doing it? Or are we maintaining what we've done until this is fully? That just might
Because
be a
we're already
question
in
that
the
comes up.
process, so do we
Yeah,
continue
once
with
we're
the
in the
old? I feel like
process, right.
when we're in the old process, we continue with that, just because you planned, but I don't know how committee feels on that, that's.
I think that's what we decided before.
I think
Yeah.
that would be my sense, so we continue with the old.
From a perspective on this group, this decision won't hurt them in any way, unlike some of the others. There's no downside to them having a full private session with the board versus
That's good to know.
committee and full board.
So if we do find out there's a lot of discussion.
It's the
and-
same amount of time, it's the
Okay.
same everything. So if you change that process down the line, unlike
Okay,
with science,
thank you.
there's
That
no
helps to know.
implication of that. In their case, we've been kind of planning forward knowing this may be, so they're ready to go either direction.
I was gonna say, we're ready to take either road.
Right? You can take halfway one and halfway two.
So, but I think we can be open, I think, because we're gonna have the same problem if, so if we think we need a special session, then we should just go ahead and have it to, get the work done before board meeting.
Whether we would go path 1 or path 2,
Yeah.
or if you want to go old 8-step process.
But
that still
hopefully we
has
can
the
just
same.
stick with the old process for this because we already started it.
Hopefully you'll get it done before the board changes.
Right.
No, it won't be done. 90 days won't get us done, unfortunately. We tried. Well, the 90 days, put it out for 90 days. So we don't even get to come till November to put it out for 90 days. So. We'll have
Any other questions or comments before we have a motion?
You get to make the motion.
I get to make the motion.
Yeah, you
I've
you ready, Mark?
I've just been following the lead of all these old veteran board members. I'm learning. Just don't teach me your bad habits.
All right. Well done.
All right, then I'll make the recommendation, I move that we, how we want to put that though?
That the
No,
early
we want to put it,
learnings.
I just want to make sure that says what I want to say.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Well,
It's your
secret
motion.
Okay, no, that's great, that's perfect. So I move that the early learning standards be revised simultaneously and included with future K-12 standards and revisions. You've got me covered up here.
The standard.
Standards revisions, okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, beautiful. So the motion before the committee is that the early
Yay, you're officially part of
learning standards be revised simultaneously and included with future K-12 standards revisions. Any discussion to that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh gosh, you guys are unanimous. Thanks, 3 J's, Jennifer, Jessica, Jamie.
They live in the J cube.
I'm in a J.
All 4 of them are J's in their cubicle area.
John and Jimmy. Look at Jimmy John. Jimmy John, Jessica and Jimmy.
Wow.
We like our J's.
There are sometimes people that do not start with the J walk in our pod, and I have to say, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you can't come in here. You'll have to
You
step
guys are
out.
gonna take a little break, so use the restroom, get a drink,
We have to
take a 5-minute nap, or maybe a
Push
10-minute
up,
nap.
do whatever.
Eat some more.
We are
Yeah,
way
eat some more
ahead.
M&Ms.
And remember that while we take a break, that microphones are still on.
Yes, thank you.
So no swearing.
Oh, well, takes one to
That
know
was for
one.
me, wasn't it?
He's recording. Okay, he's recording right now, so it'll be.
Okay. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but our last item isn't time sensitive, and so it's something we don't need to do. And our very own Jeffrey Van Holten is busy right now, and he is presenting. So we are going to move that item to the next month. So guess
What
what?
if I tear up?
You know what? I thought you would. If you'd like to say a few things to extend the meeting, you can. Otherwise, you guys have done your work for today, and you will have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much.
Are we pushing the